What happens when the silent partner is no longer silent? For 10 years, Ava Donovan was the invisible architect behind a billion-dollar empire while her husband Cole Harrington basked in the spotlight. She was the strategist, the operator, the steady hand that built Innovate Dynamics from a garage startup into a tech behemoth. He was the face, the charm, the celebrated CEO. But when the foundation of their perfect life, a foundation she meticulously built, is shattered by the oldest betrayal. In the book, she doesn't reach for a divorce lawyer to fight over the house and the cars. She reaches for a clause buried deep in the company's bylaws, a secret fail-safe she created long ago. This isn't a story about a marriage ending. It's the story of how a woman pushed to the edge reminded everyone who truly held the power all along. The penthouse on the 72nd floor of 157 wasn't just a home. It was a statement. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below like a glittering circuit board, a city of infinite connections and buzzing energy. It was a view that Cole Harrington, CEO of Innovate Dynamics, felt he had earned. He would often stand there, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, and look down on the world he was conquering. His wife, Ava Donovan, preferred the view from the other side of the apartment, the one overlooking the quiet expanse of Central Park. To her, the park represented something organic, complex, and beautiful, a system that grew and thrived through intricate, unseen processes. It was much like the company she had helped build. On the surface, Cole and Ava were the ultimate power couple. He was impossibly handsome, with a charismatic smile and a voice that could coax venture capitalists into parting with 8-figure sums. He was the public face of Innovate Dynamics, gracing the covers of Forbes and Wired, giving TED Talks on the future of AI-driven logistics, and charming senators at DC fundraisers. Ava was his elegant, reserved counterpart. At charity galas, she was always perfectly dressed, a serene smile on her face, a supportive hand on his arm. Most people in their circle saw her as the classic billionaire's wife, a beautiful accessory who managed their homes in the city, and the Hamptons planned their social calendar and sat on philanthropic boards. They had no idea that she was the company's operational backbone. They had started Innovate Dynamics a decade ago in a cramped Palo Alto apartment. Cole was the visionary, the big ideas guy. He could see the future, but he couldn't build the road to get there. Ava, with her dual degrees in computer science and systems engineering from MIT, was the architect. She wrote the foundational code for their flagship software, Nexus, and designed the entire operational framework that allowed the company to scale. They had a simple arrangement in the beginning. Cole was CEO, the public face. Ava took the title of Chief Strategy Officer, a deliberately vague role that allowed her to work behind the scenes, unburdened by press interviews and shareholder meetings, which she despised. She managed the engineering teams, optimized the data flow, and ensured the intricate machine of the company ran without a single hiccup. Cole sold the dream. Ava built the reality. But over the years, the lines had blurred and history had been subtly rewritten. Cole's vision began to eclipse Ava's execution in the public narrative and eventually within the walls of their own home. He began to see her not as his partner, but as his most reliable employee. "Sweetheart, the numbers for the quarterly report look a little soft. Can you have your guys polish them up before the board meeting?" he'd say, not looking up from his phone as she passed him his morning espresso. Her guys. They were all her guys, the teams she had personally hired and mentored. "The server latency in the European sector is up by 0.2%. I've already deployed a patch," she'd reply, her tone even. "Great. Glad you're on top of it," he'd murmur, already absorbed in an email from his publicist. The condescension was subtle, 1,000 tiny cuts that had slowly eroded the foundation of their partnership. He had forgotten the all-nighters she pulled, the server fires she put out at 3 a.m., the ingenious algorithm she designed that had become the company's crown jewel. He saw the penthouse, the private jet, the glowing magazine articles, and believed they were reflections of his singular genius. Ava saw them as the joint output of a machine she had built, and now felt increasingly alienated from. Her world had become a gilded cage, beautiful and suffocating. The parties felt hollow. The praise directed at her husband felt like a form of erasure. The only place she still felt a sense of purpose was in the work itself. Late at night, long after Cole was asleep or out at a networking dinner, she would sit in her home office, a sleek, minimalist room that was her private sanctuary. The rest of the penthouse was decorated to Cole's ostentatious taste. But this room was all hers. On her monitors, lines of code and complex data streams flowed the pure, logical, and honest language she understood better than anything. It was here in the silent hum of the servers that she was not Mrs. Harrington, the socialite, but Ava Donovan, the engineer, and it was this version of herself she was starting to miss more than anything. The first crack appeared not as a seismic tremor, but as a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye. It was a Tuesday night in late October. Cole was supposedly in Chicago, closing a major deal with a logistics conglomerate. He was due back the next morning. Ava was working late, troubleshooting a persistent bug in a new software update. Around 11 p.m., her phone buzzed with a notification from their shared credit card account. Charge $758.90. Le Bernardin, New York, NYU. Ava stared at the notification, a frown creasing her brow. Le Bernardin, one of the city's most exclusive and romantic restaurants, and definitely not in Chicago. It was probably a mistake, she told herself, a card skimmed or a delayed charge from a previous dinner. She dismissed it and went back to her work, but a small, cold seed of unease had been planted. The next morning, Cole returned jubilant. "We got it, Ava. The Omnicorp deal is done. They signed this morning." He kissed her, his suit jacket smelling faintly of travel and success. "Congratulations, Cole. That's fantastic," she said, managing a genuine smile. "How was Chicago?" "Cold, boring. All I saw was the inside of a conference room and my hotel. I ate room service and passed out." He said it so casually, so smoothly, that for a moment she believed him. But the Le Bernardin charge lingered in the back of her mind, a loose thread on a perfect tapestry. She decided not to pull it. Not yet. A week later, the second crack appeared. Cole was in a board meeting at the Innovate Dynamics headquarters on Park Avenue. Ava was working from her home office when a courier delivered a package for him, a custom-made suit from a tailor on Savile Row. As she signed for it, she noticed the faint scent of perfume clinging to the outer packaging. It was a fragrance she didn't recognize, floral with a sharp, musky undertone, something modern and aggressive. It was nothing like her own subtle classic Chanel No. 5. Again, she tried to rationalize it. The courier, perhaps, or someone in the tailor's shop. But the seed of unease was beginning to sprout. Ava was an engineer. She didn't deal in vague suspicions. She dealt in data. Hunches were hypotheses, and hypotheses needed to be tested. That evening, as Cole showered before a gala, she walked into their cavernous walk-in closet. His travel bag from the Chicago trip was still on a bench. With a clinical detachment she didn't know she possessed, she unzipped it. Tucked into a side pocket was a folded receipt. The Peninsula Chicago. Room 1812. Room service for one. $87.50. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. There it was. Proof. He was telling the truth. But as she went to put the receipt back, another piece of paper slipped out from behind it. It wasn't a receipt. It was a valet ticket. The Peninsula, New York. Date last Tuesday. Time in 7:15 p.m. Time out 32 a.m. The blood drained from her face. The Peninsula, New York, not Chicago. He had been in the city the entire time. The dinner at Le Bernardin, the late night. It wasn't a mistake. It was a lie, a carefully constructed, deliberate lie. Her mind, trained to find patterns and solve complex problems, began to connect the dots. The late-night investor calls that he always took out on the terrace. The sudden weekend golf trips to courses he'd never expressed interest in before. The new expensive cologne he'd started wearing. And the name that kept popping up in company emails and meeting minutes, Cassandra Rowe. Cassandra was a recent hire, a sharp, ambitious MBA from Wharton, who had quickly risen to become the vice president of business development. She was beautiful in a severe corporate way, with sharp cheekbones and a wardrobe of form-fitting power suits. Cole had championed her hiring, praising her aggressive, forward-thinking strategies. Ava had found her overly sycophantic, but had dismissed it as the behavior of an ambitious subordinate. Now she saw it in a different light. Ava walked out of the closet and sat on the edge of their bed, her heart hammering against her ribs. The valet ticket felt like a lead weight in her hand. For 10 years, she had dedicated her life to building this company, this life, this partnership. She had trusted Cole implicitly, believing that while their roles had diverged, their ultimate goal was the same. Now she saw the chilling truth. While she had been building an empire, he had been building a separate life within it. The porcelain facade of their perfect marriage had not just cracked, it was about to shatter. And as the initial shock gave way to a cold, crystalline fury, Ava Donovan knew one thing for certain. She would not be the one cut by the shards. The following Friday, Cole told Ava he had to fly to London for an emergency meeting with their European investors. "It's a complete firestorm," he said, packing a briefcase with feigned urgency. "The board is demanding a face-to-face. I'll be back Sunday morning. Don't wait up." Ava watched him, her expression a perfect mask of wifely concern. "Of course. Be safe." But this time she was prepared. She was no longer operating on suspicion. She was collecting data for a final, definitive proof. For the past week, she had been a ghost in her own life, observing, noting, and planning. She had installed a location-sharing app on his phone months ago, under the guise of security, a precaution he had readily agreed to. He had no idea she could access it from her own devices. An hour after he left for JFK, the app showed his phone's location pinging not at the airport, but at the Greenwich Hotel in Tribeca, a boutique hotel known for its privacy and exclusivity. Ava didn't rush. She didn't call him screaming accusations. Instead, a chilling calm settled over her. She took a shower, styled her hair, and put on a simple but elegant black dress. She looked in the mirror not at a betrayed wife, but at a CEO about to handle a hostile takeover. Her objective was not emotional release, it was confirmation. She drove herself downtown, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of her Tesla. The rage was there, a white-hot coil in her stomach, but her mind was icily clear. She parked a block away and walked to the hotel, the cool night air doing little to quell the fire inside her. At the front desk, she smiled warmly at the concierge. "Hi. I'm supposed to be meeting my husband Cole Harrington. I believe he's already checked in. I'm so sorry, my phone just died, and he was supposed to send me the room number. She projected an air of breezy confidence, the kind of woman who belonged in a place like this. The concierge, a polished young man named Daniel, tapped at his computer. Of course, Mrs. Harrington. He's in the fireplace suite, room 402. Shall I call up for you? Oh no, please don't, she said, her smile never faltering. I want to surprise him. Of course, he replied, returning her smile. Enjoy your evening. As she walked towards the elevator, Ava felt a strange sense of dissociation, as if she were watching a character in a movie. The elevator ride was silent, the plush, wood-paneled car, ascending like a slow-motion executioner's cart. When she reached the 4th floor, she walked down the dimly lit hallway, her heels making no sound on the thick carpet. She stood before room 402 for a long moment, taking a single deep breath. She had a spare keycard to all their accounts, another security measure she'd insisted on. She held it up to the sensor. The light flashed green with a soft electronic click. The door swung open silently. The suite was large, dominated by a roaring fireplace, and in the warm glow of the flames she saw them. Cole was on the sofa. His tie loosened, a glass of whiskey in his hand. Kneeling before him, her back to the door, was Cassandra Rowe. Her sharp, tailored blazer was tossed over a chair, and she was wearing a silk blouse that was partially unbuttoned. She was laughing, reaching up to run a hand through Cole's hair. The scene was so intimate, so comfortable, so utterly devoid of the firestorm meeting he was supposed to be in, that the air was knocked from Ava's lungs. They hadn't heard her enter. The board is just a bunch of old men, Cole, Cassandra was saying, her voice dripping with dismissive arrogance. They don't see the future. You do. We do. Cole chuckled a low, smug sound. They just need to be managed. Don't worry about them. They'll fall in line. He leaned down to kiss her. It was then that he saw her. His eyes widened over Cassandra's shoulder, the color draining from his face. He froze his lips inches from hers. The smug confidence evaporated, replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. Cassandra, sensing the change, turned. Her own expression shifted from seduction to horror in a split second. She scrambled to her feet, fumbling with the buttons of her blouse. Silence. The only sound was the crackling of the fire. Ava didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't throw anything. She simply stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the scene with the cool, analytical precision of an engineer diagnosing a catastrophic system failure. She looked at Cole's panicked face, at Cassandra's pathetic attempt to regain her composure, at the 2 half-empty glasses on the coffee table, at the rumpled cushions on the sofa. Data points. London looks a lot like Tribeca this time of year, Ava said, her voice unnervingly calm. Ava, this isn't what it looks like, Cole stammered, getting to his feet. It was the weakest, most cliché line imaginable, and it hung in the air like a foul odor. Really? Ava replied, a single eyebrow arched. Because it looks exactly like what it is. It looks like you've been lying to me. It looks like you've been using company resources to facilitate an affair with a subordinate. And it looks like you are monumentally stupid for thinking I wouldn't find out. Cassandra found her voice a high, reedy sound. This is a private matter. Ava's head snapped towards her, her eyes like chips of ice. When you sleep with the CEO of a publicly traded company, your work for it stops being a private matter, Ms. Rowe. It becomes a question of corporate governance ethics and fiduciary duty. You should know that. You went to Wharton after all. Cassandra visibly flinched. Ava's gaze returned to her husband. The hurt was there, a deep tectonic agony, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she let him see the cold fury that was now crystallizing into purpose. "Get your things," she said to Cassandra, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You have 5 minutes to vacate this room." Then she looked at Cole, who stood there, utterly paralyzed. "You and I have a board meeting to prepare for." She turned and walked out, closing the door softly behind her. She didn't slam it. A slam would have been an emotional release. This was a tactical withdrawal. The battle was over. The war was just beginning. Ava didn't go home. The penthouse felt tainted, a stage set for a life that was no longer real. Instead, she drove to a quiet hotel in a different part of the city, checked in under her maiden name, and opened her laptop. The initial shock wave of betrayal was receding, replaced by the familiar hum of strategic thinking. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Action was the only antidote. Her first call was to Robert Chen, a senior partner at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz. Robert wasn't just any corporate lawyer. He was the razor-sharp, legal mind Ava had insisted on hiring when they first incorporated Innovate Dynamics. Cole had wanted a flashier firm one that sponsored golf tournaments. Ava had wanted the best. As with most things, she had won that argument. "Robert," she said when he picked up his voice, groggy with sleep. It was after midnight. "It's Ava Donovan. We have a situation. I need to invoke Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ava could almost hear the gears turning in Robert's formidable brain as he accessed a decade-old memory file. "Section 8B, he finally said, his voice now wide awake and sharp. "The moral turpitude and fiduciary integrity clause. Are you certain, Ava?" "I have definitive, inarguable proof," she replied, her voice as steady as steel. "I'll forward the documentation to your secure server within the hour. I'll be at my office at 6 a.m. We'll need to call an emergency board meeting." Robert said, his tone all business. "This is going to be a detonation." "I know," Ava said. "Bring a fire extinguisher." She hung up and began to assemble her case. This was her true genius. Not just in writing code, but in architecting systems, be they software or legal frameworks, to be robust, logical, and prepared for every contingency. 10 years ago, as a bright-eyed but already cautious co-founder, Ava had looked at the standard partnership agreements and found them lacking. They protected against financial malfeasance, criminal activity, and gross negligence. But they didn't protect against the more insidious threats, arrogance, recklessness, and the kind of personal behavior that could irrevocably damage the company's reputation and internal morale. So with Robert Chen's help, she had drafted Section 8B. It was a unique and powerful clause buried deep within the legal boilerplate of the company's charter, a document Cole had famously boasted of not reading, saying, "That's what I pay lawyers for." The clause stipulated that if a C-suite executive, specifically one holding a key founder designation, which only applied to Cole and Ava, were found to have engaged in conduct constituting moral turpitude, which included but was not limited to using company assets to facilitate an illicit relationship, or engaging in a relationship with a subordinate that compromises corporate integrity, then a very specific chain of events would be triggered. The offending party would be deemed to have breached their fiduciary duty to the company. This breach would automatically trigger a mandatory buyout provision of their controlling shares. But it wasn't a simple market value buyout. The clause stated that the non-offending key founder would have the primary and exclusive right to purchase all of the offending founder's voting shares for a predetermined price, the original par value from the company's first seed round of funding. For Cole's 40% stake in a company now worth billions, that price was a paltry $40,000. It was a nuclear option, a doomsday device Ava had built into the very DNA of their company. She had hoped she would never have to use it. She had created it not out of a premonition of infidelity, but from a pragmatic engineer's desire to protect the system she was building from its most unpredictable variable, human behavior. Cole's ego was both his greatest asset and his greatest liability. Ava had simply coded a backstop for the liability. For the next few hours, Ava worked with methodical precision. She compiled the evidence, the credit card statement from Le Bernardin, the valet ticket from the Peninsula, New York, that contradicted his expense report for the Chicago trip, a screenshot of his phone's location data from that evening, and a calm, factual written affidavit of what she had witnessed in room 402 of the Greenwich Hotel. She also cross-referenced Cassandra Rowe's travel and expense reports, quickly finding a pattern of booking flights and hotels that mirrored Cole's on his solo business trips. It was a clean, irrefutable chain of evidence demonstrating a pattern of deceit and the misuse of company funds. When she was done, she didn't feel triumph. She felt a profound, aching sadness. The system had worked as designed. The bug had been identified. But it meant the core programming of her life was fundamentally corrupted and had to be purged. She had architected the perfect corporate coup, but in doing so, she had to acknowledge the utter failure of her marriage. She sent the encrypted file to Robert Chen at 4:37 a.m. Then for the first time that night, she closed her laptop, curled up on the hotel bed, and allowed herself a few moments to weep for the man she thought she had married and the partnership she thought they had built. The tears were brief and hot. When they stopped, only cold resolve remained. The architect had her blueprint. Now it was time to build. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday morning. Cole, after a weekend of frantic unanswered calls and texts to Ava, arrived looking haggard but defiant. He had clearly convinced himself this was a domestic dispute that had foolishly spilled into the professional sphere. He saw it as an embarrassment to be managed afire, to be stamped out with his signature charm and a public relations strategy. He walked into the 80th floor boardroom, ready to apologize for his lapse in judgment and assure the board it would not affect the company's performance. He was not prepared for what awaited him. Ava was already there, seated at the head of the long mahogany table, a spot usually reserved for him. She was dressed in a charcoal gray suit, her posture impeccable, her face serene and unreadable. Beside her sat Robert Chen, his files laid out before him with surgical precision. The other 6 board members were seated, their expressions a mixture of confusion, concern, and apprehension. They had been summoned with no agenda, only a note citing a matter of urgent corporate governance. Cole faltered for a second, seeing Ava in his chair. "Ava, what is this? I think we should discuss this privately," he said, trying to project an air of calm authority. "We are long past a private discussion, Cole," Ava replied, her voice even and clear, carrying across the silent room. "Please take a seat." She gestured to an empty chair on the side. The power dynamic was immediately shockingly clear. He was no longer the host of this meeting. He was a guest. He hesitated, then, seeing the stony faces of the board, reluctantly sat down. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Ava began, her eyes scanning each board member. "I have called this meeting to address a grave breach of fiduciary duty by our CEO, Mr. Harrington. and to invoke a non-negotiable remedy as stipulated in our corporate charter. A murmur went through the room. George Findlay, a gruff old-school investor and the board's longest-serving member, scowled. Ava, with all due respect, if this is about a personal matter. It ceased to be a personal matter, George. Ava cut in, her tone sharp but respectful. When Mr. Harrington began using company funds to conduct an affair with a subordinate, falsifying expense reports to cover his tracks and compromising the ethical integrity of this entire organization. Cole turned purple. This is an outrageous slander. It's a private issue being twisted. Robert, Ava said calmly, ignoring Cole's outburst. Robert Chen stood up. Each of you has a tablet in front of you, he said, his voice dry and factual. You will find a secured file containing evidence of Mr. Harrington's activities. This includes falsified expense reports, credit card statements showing non-business-related expenditures, and location data that directly contradicts his official company travel itinerary. You will also find a sworn affidavit from Mrs. Donovan. As the board members began swiping through the files, the atmosphere in the room turned arctic. Jaws tightened, eyes widened. George Findlay's scowl deepened into a look of profound disgust. Furthermore, Robert continued, these actions constitute a clear violation of Article 4, Section 8B of the Innovate Dynamics Founding Charter, which all of you ratified upon joining this board. The clause is titled Moral Turpitude and Fiduciary Integrity. He projected the clause onto the large screen at the end of the room. The dense legalese appeared in stark black and white. Robert walked the board through it, his words precise and devastating. He explained how Cole's actions had triggered the clause, and he laid out the unavoidable consequence. And as such, the non-offending key founder, Mrs. Ava Donovan, now holds the exclusive right to purchase Mr. Harrington's entire stake of 8 million voting shares for their original pair value of half a cent per share. The total purchase price is $40,000. The silence that followed was absolute. It was as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. The board members stared at the screen, then at Ava, then at Cole, who looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. This is insane, Cole finally exploded, slamming his fist on the table. You can't be serious. A vendetta clause. This is theft. I built this company. We built this company, Ava corrected him, her voice quiet but carrying immense weight. You were the face, Cole. I was the foundation. And I built the foundation to last with fail-safes to protect it from catastrophic failure. You signed the document. You agreed to the terms. Your personal behavior is the catastrophe. George Findlay looked at Robert Chen. Is this legally binding? It is ironclad, Robert stated. Drafted, signed, and ratified. The evidence of the breach is, in my professional opinion, indisputable. Ava slid a cashier's check across the table. It slid to a stop directly in front of Cole. It was made out to him in the amount of $40,000. This is your severance, Cole, Ava said. The transaction is effective immediately. As the new majority shareholder, my first act is to call a vote. I move to remove Cole Harrington as CEO and chairman of the board of Innovate Dynamics, effective immediately for cause. She looked around the table. All in favor. One by one, the hands went up. Some reluctantly, some with a grim sense of duty. George Findlay was the last, his eyes locking with Ava's, for a long moment before his hand rose decisively. It was unanimous. Cole Harrington, the charismatic titan of the tech world, sat staring at the check, his face a mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. He had walked into the room a billionaire CEO in command of his empire. He would walk out with nothing but 40,000 and the smouldering ruins of his life. Ava stood up, her expression unchanging. "The second order of business," she announced to the stunned room, "is to appoint an interim CEO. I nominate myself. We have a company to stabilize." The coup was complete. It was swift, brutal, and executed with devastating precision. The architect had not just evicted the tenant, she had reclaimed the entire building. The news of Cole Harrington's immediate resignation and Ava Donovan's appointment as interim CEO hit Innovate Dynamics like a shockwave. The official press release, carefully crafted by Robert Chen and a crisis PR team, was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, citing personal reasons and a desire for Cole to pursue other opportunities. But within the glass walls of the company, the rumor mill churned at light speed. Cassandra Rowe was fired before the board meeting had even concluded. Her termination was handled swiftly and silently, by HR citing a gross violation of the company's code of conduct. She was escorted from the building with a small box of her personal effects, her meteoric rise ending in an abrupt and humiliating fall. She was a footnote in the larger drama, a casualty of a war she hadn't even known was being waged. Ava's first day as CEO was a trial by fire. She walked into the executive suite, a floor she had rarely visited, and found a staff accustomed to Cole's larger-than-life, charm-based leadership. They now faced a woman they barely knew, one they had mentally catalogued as the CEO's quiet wife. They saw her as a placeholder, a grieving spouse, thrust into a role she couldn't possibly handle. Her first meeting was with the senior leadership team. They sat around the conference table, their expressions guarded their body language skeptical. They were Cole's guys' men he had hired for their loyalty and salesmanship. "I understand this is an abrupt transition," Ava began, her voice calm and measured. "And I know many of you have questions. My priority right now is stability and continuity. Our clients, our products, and our employees are what matter. The mission of Innovate Dynamics has not changed." The VP of Sales, a slick, overconfident man named Mark Walton, leaned back in his chair. With all due respect, Ava Cole was the rainmaker. He had the relationships. Who's going to be the face of the company now? It was a direct challenge to her authority. The entire room waited to see how she would respond. "The face of the company will be its performance," Ava replied without missing a beat. "For too long, we've relied on one man's personality. From now on, we will rely on the strength of our product and the quality of our execution. Our numbers will speak for us. Our technology will be our brand." She then pivoted, demonstrating a level of operational knowledge that stunned them. "Mark, your team's conversion rate in the Midwest has been lagging by 12% for 2 quarters. I believe it's due to a failure to properly demonstrate the Nexus 7 predictive analytics module." "Ben," she said, turning to the head of engineering, a man she had worked with for years, "I want you to assign 2 of your top systems analysts to Mark's team for the next month to provide deep-dive technical support on their sales calls." She went around the room addressing each department head with a similar incisive command of their metrics, challenges, and personnel. She knew their projects, their budgets, their sticking points. The VPs who had expected a soft, emotional speech were left scrambling to keep up. She wasn't talking about vision or synergy. She was talking about server uptime, API integration, and supply chain logistics. She was speaking the language of the machine she had built. The skepticism in the room slowly began to curdle into a grudging respect. This was not the woman they saw in society magazines. This was someone who knew the guts of the company better than they did. But the internal battle was only half the problem. The external one was just beginning. Cole, stripped of his power, but not his connections, was not going away quietly. He immediately began a whisper campaign against Ava. He called friendly journalists, influential investors, and former colleagues, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive, power-hungry wife who had used a legal technicality to steal his life's work. The narrative he spun was insidious and effective. Ava was an engineer, not a leader, a glorified coder who had no business running a multi-billion-dollar company. The market reacted with uncertainty. Innovate Dynamics stock, which had soared under Cole's charismatic leadership, wobbled, dropping % in the first 48 hours. George Findlay, the formidable board member, called her into his office at the end of her second day. The room was old-world wealth filled with dark wood and leather-bound books. "The street is nervous, Ava," he said, his voice a low rumble. "They see Cole as the visionary. They see you as an unknown quantity. This stunt you pulled in the boardroom was brilliant, I'll grant you that. But now you have to prove you can actually fly the plane." "I don't need to fly it, George," Ava replied, meeting his intense gaze without flinching. "I built the engine. I know how it works. Cole was just the pilot who liked to wave at the crowds from the cockpit." George studied her for a long moment, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his eyes. "The market doesn't care about who built the engine. It cares about quarterly earnings and forward guidance. You have 1 quarter, Ava. 1 quarter to stabilize the stock and prove that you are not just an interim solution. If you can't, the board will have no choice but to initiate a search for a permanent CEO." It was an ultimatum. A throne was one thing to seize, but another thing entirely to hold. The crown felt heavy on her head, and Ava knew that the people who had just watched her depose the king were now waiting to see if the new queen would stumble. The first few weeks were brutal. Cole's shadow loomed large over the company, and his campaign to undermine Ava was relentless and cunning. He knew the company's pressure points because he had helped create them. His first move was to poach 2 of Innovate Dynamics' top salespeople, luring them to a competitor with massive signing bonuses and promises of equity. The move was calculated to hit Ava where she was weakest client-facing relationships. He followed this by leaking a carefully selected out-of-context internal memo to a tech blog suggesting that Innovate Dynamics was planning to sunset a popular legacy product, causing panic among a key segment of their customer base. The phone lines lit up. Ava's inbox was a raging inferno of concerned clients, anxious investors, and opportunistic competitors. The boardroom, which she had commanded so decisively, now felt like a lonely island in a sea of doubt. The senior VPs, while outwardly compliant, were hedging their bets, their loyalty still a flickering flame. Ava responded not with panic, but with process. She understood that a storm was not something you could fight head-on. It was something you had to navigate with precision and strength. She worked 18-hour days, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning determination to prove everyone wrong. Instead of trying to replicate Cole's charm offensive, she leaned into her own strengths, data transparency, and technical superiority. She personally called every single client affected by the leaked memo. She didn't offer platitudes or sales speak. She walked them through the product roadmap herself, explaining the technical reasons for the eventual migration and demonstrating the superior capabilities of the new system. She was candid, brilliant, and utterly convincing. She didn't sell them a dream. She gave them a blueprint. Several clients who had been on the verge of leaving ended up signing early adopter contracts for the new platform. Internally, she focused on shoring up her base. She knew she couldn't win over Cole's loyalists overnight. Instead, she focused on the heart of the company, the engineers, the developers, and the project managers. The people who, like her, had been working in the shadows for years. She spent hours every day, not in the executive suite, but down in the engineering pits. She held town halls with the coders, not in the formal auditorium, but in their break rooms, surrounded by whiteboards and empty pizza boxes. She didn't give speeches. She asked questions. What were their biggest frustrations? What bureaucratic hurdles were slowing them down? What tools did they need? Ben Carter, her longtime head of engineering, watched the transformation with quiet admiration. Cole would come down here once a quarter for a photo op, he told a group of senior developers. Ava comes down here to help us debug a kernel panic. She authorized a new budget for top-of-the-line development hardware, something the engineers had been requesting for years. But Cole had dismissed as an unnecessary expense. She streamlined the approval process for new projects, cutting through layers of red tape that had stifled innovation. She implemented a Founders Award, a significant cash bonus for any employee who developed a patentable innovation for the company. Morale, which had plummeted after Cole's ousting, began to climb. The engineers who had long felt undervalued now felt seen and empowered. They had a leader who spoke their language, who understood their work, and who respected their contributions. They began to work with a renewed sense of purpose, not for the stock price or the CEO, but for the product itself, and for the woman who had always been one of them. Cole's sabotage attempts continued. He used his connections to try and block a crucial supply chain deal for new server components. When Ava found out, she didn't try to go through the same channels. She dug into the technical specifications and found a smaller, more innovative supplier in Finland that could provide superior hardware at a 15% lower cost. She flew to Helsinki herself, met with their engineers, and closed the deal in 36 hours. She was fighting a guerrilla war against a ghost. Cole was attacking the company's reputation and relationships. Ava was fortifying its foundation, making it stronger, faster, and more efficient from the inside out. One night, working late in her new office, the same one where Cole used to entertain reporters, she looked out at the glittering city. She was exhausted, lonelier than she had ever been, and facing a battle that was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of clarity. The gilded cage was gone. The storm was raging, but she was at the helm of her own ship, navigating with her own map. And for the first time, she truly believed she could bring it safely to shore. The question was whether the board and the market would give her enough time to do it. For 2 months, Ava played defense. She stabilized the company, reassured clients, and bolstered internal morale. She had successfully weathered the storm. Now it was time to change the weather. She knew that to truly secure her position and the future of Innovate Dynamics, she couldn't just survive Cole's attacks. She had to definitively end them. Her counteroffensive began in the one place Cole would never expect: the company's financial archives. Cole had always viewed the accounting department as a boring necessity, a team of number crunchers who just processed his expense reports. Ava, however, saw it as a repository of data, a log file of the company's history. And like any good engineer, she knew that log files often contained evidence of critical errors. With a team of discreet forensic accountants, she initiated a full audit of the past 5 years of executive spending, focusing on a series of venture funds and shell corporations Cole had set up for strategic acquisitions. On the surface, they looked legitimate, but Ava, with her intimate knowledge of the company's operations, knew that several of these acquisitions had never been integrated into their tech stack. They were ghost assets. After weeks of painstaking work, Tracing wire transfers and cross-referencing invoices, the accountants found the smoking gun. Cole had been using a subsidiary shell corporation, Harrington Ventures, to systematically siphon company funds. He would use Innovate Dynamics capital to invest in promising startups only for those startups to then hire his personal consulting firm for exorbitant fees. He was essentially paying himself with company money, dressing it up as strategic investment. It was a sophisticated scheme, cleverly hidden behind layers of corporate jargon and legal entities. It wasn't just unethical. It was felony-grade embezzlement. Ava now held a weapon far more powerful than the morality clause. This wasn't about personal betrayal. This was a direct crime against the company and its shareholders. Her second line of attack was aimed at the market. She knew she needed a definitive win, a bold stroke that would silence the doubters and prove that Innovate Dynamics was not just surviving, but thriving under her leadership. She set her sights on a contract that Cole had been chasing for over a year and had spectacularly failed to land a complete logistics overhaul for Titan Retail, the largest e-commerce giant in the world. Cole had tried to win them over with lavish dinners, golf games, and grand promises. Ava read the technical briefs and realized the Titan team wasn't interested in charm. They were engineers with a massive, complex problem, so she approached them differently. She didn't ask for a meeting with their CEO. She requested a technical workshop with their chief technology officer and lead architects. She flew to their Seattle headquarters, not with a sales team, but with Ben Carter and 2 of her top developers. For 2 days, they didn't present a single PowerPoint slide. Instead, they whiteboarded. They dove deep into Titan's existing infrastructure, identifying bottlenecks and inefficiencies that Titan's own team hadn't seen. Then Ava unveiled her solution, not just a sale of their Nexus 7 software, but a proposal to create a bespoke, deeply integrated platform, Nexus Prime, built specifically for Titan's unique scale. It was an audacious, incredibly complex proposal that would require a massive commitment of resources. It was also brilliant. The Titan CTO, a woman known for her no-nonsense engineering-first approach, was visibly impressed. "No CEO has ever come in here and talked to me about kernel-level data processing," she said. "They just want to take my boss to dinner. You're offering a real solution." A week later, Innovate Dynamics was awarded the Titan Retail contract. It was the largest deal in the company's history, valued at over $500 million over 5 years. The news hit the financial world like a thunderclap. The day of the announcement, Innovate Dynamics stock didn't just stabilize. It soared, jumping 22% in a single day of trading, reaching an all-time high. The narrative instantly flipped. Ava Donovan was no longer the interim CEO or the jilted wife. She was the visionary leader who had landed the contract of the decade. The tech blogs that had questioned her ability were now running glowing profiles about her strategic genius. With the company's future secured and her reputation cemented, Ava made her final move. She called a private meeting with Cole and his lawyer. She didn't bring Robert Chen. She went alone. They met in a sterile conference room at a neutral law firm. Cole walked in with a familiar swagger, likely believing the soaring stock price gave him new leverage to negotiate a better exit package. Ava didn't waste time with pleasantries. She slid a single folder across the table. Inside was a summary of the forensic accountant's report detailing the embezzlement scheme from Harrington Ventures. Cole's face went white as he read it. The swagger vanished, replaced by the same raw panic she had seen in the hotel room. "The district attorney's office would be very interested in this," Ava said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Fraud embezzlement. That carries a mandatory prison sentence, Cole. and I doubt you'd enjoy the view from a cell as much as the one from the penthouse." She then slid a second document across the table. It was a settlement agreement. It stipulated that Cole would publicly release a statement praising her leadership and wishing the company well. He would sign an ironclad non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. In exchange for his full and immediate cooperation, the findings of the audit would remain sealed. "You have no more moves left, Cole," she said, her voice quiet but absolute. "This isn't a negotiation. It's the period at the end of the sentence. You can either be a disgraced, forgotten ex-CEO, or you can be a convicted felon. The choice is yours." He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and defeat. He was looking at the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed. And he finally saw her for who she was. The architect of his rise, and now the architect of his utter, complete ruin. Checkmate. The final severance agreement was signed. Cole Harrington vanished from the tech world as quickly as he had risen. His public statement was bland and complimentary, a final humiliating act of capitulation. He took a modest buyout for his few remaining non-controlling shares and retired to a life of obscurity, the ghost of his former glory. The whispers against Ava ceased, replaced by an awed respect in the corridors of Silicon Valley and Wall Street. 3 months after the boardroom coup, George Findlay called another board meeting. Ava walked in, expecting another grilling on quarterly projections. Instead, she found the board members standing, and as she entered, they began to applaud. George, his usual gruff expression replaced with a genuine smile, held up a glass. "To our CEO," he said, his voice booming in the quiet room, "who has not only weathered the storm, but has steered this company into a new era of prosperity and integrity. The board has voted unanimously. The interim tag is officially removed. Congratulations, Madam CEO." Ava felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling that was more satisfying than any stock price or news headline. It was the feeling of earned respect. In the months that followed, Innovate Dynamics was transformed. The culture shifted from one driven by personality and salesmanship to one driven by innovation, collaboration, and excellence. Ava promoted from within, elevating talented engineers and managers who had been overlooked in the previous regime. Ben Carter became her chief technology officer, her trusted right hand. The company became known not just for its profits, but as one of the best places to work in the tech industry. The penthouse on the 72nd floor was sold. Ava moved into a chic modern apartment downtown, a space that was entirely her own, filled with books, art, and technology. Her home office was no longer a sanctuary from a hollow life. It was a command center for a fulfilling one. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful night at the Greenwich Hotel, Ava stood at the window of her new office, the one she had earned looking out at the city lights. The view was just as spectacular, but it felt different. She wasn't looking down on a world conquered by someone else, a world she had helped build in secret. She was looking out at her city, her company, her future. She had lost a husband, a marriage, and the life she thought she knew. But in the wreckage, she had not found ruin. She had found herself. She had reclaimed her name, her work, and her power. She was no longer the silent partner, the woman behind the man. She was Ava Donovan, the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, and she was just getting started. The architect was finally living in the cathedral she had built. Ava Donovan's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room is often the most powerful. She transformed the deepest personal betrayal into a catalyst for an incredible professional triumph. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully hers and proving that true leadership isn't about charm or charisma, but about competence, integrity, and unwavering strength. Her journey from the shadows to the CEO's chair shows that the best laid plans are the ones you make for yourself long before you ever need them. If her story of resilience and strategic brilliance resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own hidden strength. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more real-life stories of incredible triumphs and dramatic twists. What part of Ava's story impressed you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever been so certain of your happiness that the thought of it shattering feels like a scene from a movie, not your own life? I had it all. A loving husband of 8 years, a beautiful home we'd built together, and our first child on the way. I was living the dream. But then a woman I'd never met called me, her voice dripping with pity to inform me that my entire life was a lie. She was his real love, she said, and I was just an obligation. She thought she held all the cards. What she didn't know was that in my husband's world of carefully constructed lies, I was about to play an old recording that would burn it all to the ground. Our house on Maple Creek Lane wasn't just built of wood and stone. It was constructed from 8 years of shared dreams. I, Amelia Hayes, an interior designer by trade, had personally overseen every detail. The warm oak floors, the large bay window in the living room that caught the morning sun, the kitchen island where my husband, Lucas Sterling, would leave me coffee every morning before heading to his high-powered job in finance. Every corner held a memory, a testament to the life we had so carefully curated. At 34 and 7 months pregnant with our first child, a daughter we planned to name Olivia, I felt a sense of profound, settled contentment. Lucas, with his sharp suit's confident smile and the faint scent of expensive cologne, was the architect of our security. He was a partner at a downtown investment firm, a world of high stakes and long hours that I respected and supported. He was my rock, my confidant, my everything. We were that couple, the one our friends pointed to as proof that true, lasting love existed. The first crack in this perfect facade was almost imperceptible. It was a Tuesday night in late May. Lucas came home well past midnight, which wasn't unusual, but the excuse was. The servers crashed downtown, had to work with IT all night to get the trading platforms back online for the Asian markets. He'd mumbled, dropping his briefcase by the door and loosening his tie. I was in bed, propped up by pillows, a book resting on my swollen belly. "Oh, honey, that's awful. Are you hungry? I can heat up the casserole." "No, I'm exhausted. Just need a shower," he said, avoiding my eyes. He kissed my forehead, a fleeting, almost obligatory gesture. As he walked past, a scent wafted over to me. It wasn't his usual Tom Ford cologne. It was something lighter, floral, distinctly feminine. Perfume. I frowned. Maybe he'd been near a female colleague during the IT crisis. Plausible. I told myself to stop being silly. My hormones were making me paranoid. I pushed the thought away, chalking it up to the anxieties of a first-time mother. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the cracks began to spiderweb. The late nights at the office became more frequent. Phone calls were suddenly taken on the back patio, his voice a low, intimate murmur. When I'd walk by, he'd abruptly change his tone, making it louder, more professional. Yes, I understand the risk portfolio, Henderson. Send me the updated prospectus. But I'd heard the softer tone that preceded it. He became more attached to his phone than ever, its screen angled away from me with a practiced subtlety. Once he left it on the kitchen counter while he showered. I felt a wave of guilt wash over me, but a stronger, more desperate curiosity took hold. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked it up. Locked. Facial recognition. Of course, I put it back down, my hand trembling slightly. What was I doing? I was Amelia Hayes, and I trusted my husband. The gaslighting was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. "You seem a bit on edge lately, Ames," he said one evening, rubbing my shoulders as I stood looking out the bay window. "Is the pregnancy getting to you? You know you can talk to me about anything. You've just been so distant, Lucas. So busy." He sighed a long, weary sound. "Honey, I'm closing the biggest deal of my career. This sets us up for life. I'm doing this for us, for Olivia. I thought you understood that. The pressure is immense. The last thing I need is to feel like I'm being interrogated when I come home." He was so convincing. He expertly turned my valid concerns into an attack on his hard work, making me feel selfish and ungrateful. I found myself apologizing. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just being hormonal and emotional. I know you're working hard for us." He smiled, that charming, disarming smile that had made me fall in love with him at a college football game a decade ago. That's my girl. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a mouse. Lucas was on a 2-day business trip to Chicago. I was organizing our digital files, sorting through years of photos and documents to make space for the torrent of baby pictures to come. I decided to clean up our shared cloud drive, a digital attic filled with old receipts, travel confirmations, and forgotten documents. I clicked on a folder labeled Expense Reports, 2025. Inside were PDF receipts he'd uploaded for work. I was about to close it when my eyes caught on a file name, Receipt Hotel Celeste, 06/04/25. The date was from 3 weeks ago, a night he was supposedly working late at the office. Hotel Celeste wasn't in Chicago. It was a chic boutique hotel in our city, less than 5 miles from his downtown office. My breath hitched. My fingers felt like ice as I double-clicked the file. The PDF opened. A one-night stay, a king suite, and a room service charge that made my blood run cold. Dinner for 2 oysters champagne, a filet mignon, and a chocolate lava cake. Total $342,050. It was a lover's cliché. And underneath another charge from the hotel's gift shop, a Sophie Beale Bras petite perle necklace. The name meant nothing to me, but the price tag did $1,250. I had never received such a necklace. I felt the baby kick a sharp, sudden jolt, as if she could sense my distress. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, a primal need to protect her from the poison that was now coursing through my veins. The perfume the late nights, the secret calls it, wasn't paranoia. It was intuition. It was the truth. I sat there in the silent house, the glow of the monitor illuminating my tear-streaked face. The man I had built my world around was a stranger. The foundation of our life wasn't stone. It was sand. And the tide was coming in. I didn't cry for long. The shock quickly morphed into something else. Something cool and hard and sharp. Anger. I wasn't just a hormonal pregnant woman. I was a woman who had been played for a fool, and I would not go down quietly. My mind started working the gears of my past self, the meticulous, detail-oriented designer grinding back to life. He had built a facade. I would be the one to orchestrate its demolition. The next morning, I woke up with a chilling clarity. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but it was now insulated by a layer of cold resolve. I would not confront him. Not yet. A premature confrontation would only lead to more lies, more gaslighting, and a chance for him to cover his tracks. I needed more than a hotel receipt. I needed an airtight case. I needed undeniable, soul-crushing proof. My first call was to my best friend, Sarah Jenkins, a sharp-witted lawyer with a cynical view of the world. Sarah had been my maid of honor and my fiercest protector. Amelia. "You're up early. Everything okay with the baby?" she answered, her voice still thick with sleep. I took a shaky breath. "Sarah, I need you. I think Lucas is having an affair." There was a pause, then the sound of rustling sheets. "I'm on my way. Don't do anything. Don't say anything to him. Just act normal. I'll be there in 20 minutes with coffee and croissants." True to her word, Sarah arrived, her expression a mixture of fury and concern. I laid out the evidence on the kitchen island, the hotel receipt, the timeline of his late nights, the memory of the strange perfume. She listened intently, her lawyer's mind processing every detail. The bastard. She breathed, her knuckles white around her coffee mug. "Amelia, I am so sorry." "Don't be sorry," I said, my voice steady. "Be my counsel." "What do I do?" "We dig." Sarah said, her eyes glinting. "We become archaeologists. We're going to unearth every single lie." That afternoon, with Sarah's guidance, I began the grim task of excavating my husband's secret life. The first step was practical. I called our mobile phone provider. Posing as the doting, slightly confused pregnant wife trying to consolidate our family plan, I managed to get a detailed call and text log for the past 6 months sent to my email. "My husband is so busy, he asked me to handle it. But you know how it is with pregnancy brain." I can barely remember my own name. I'd chirped to the customer service agent, a performance that left a bitter taste in my mouth. The call log was a treasure map of deceit. There was one number that appeared with startling frequency. Dozens of calls, often late at night. Hundreds of texts. The calls were long, sometimes over an hour. I Googled the number. It was a mobile phone, no name attached. Next, the credit cards. I had access to our joint accounts. I meticulously went through months of statements cross-referencing dates with Lucas's work calendar. There were charges for dinners at intimate restaurants I'd never been to, flower deliveries to an address in a trendy downtown condo building, and payments to a high-end lingerie boutique. The Sophie Bille Brahe necklace from the hotel receipt now had context. It was all there, a digital breadcrumb trail of his betrayal. The final piece was the most painful. I needed a face, a name. Sarah, with her access to legal databases, ran the phone number. A hit. Chloe Reed. Sarah said over the phone, her voice grim. Age 26. Lives at the address where the flowers were sent. She's a junior financial analyst at Matheson & Co., one of the firms Lucas's company works with on the big merger deal. Chloe Reed. The name felt like a physical blow. I typed it into the search bar of Instagram. Her profile was public. My heart pounded as her life flashed before me on the screen. She was beautiful in a youthful, effervescent way that felt like a direct contrast to my own settled maternal state. There were pictures of her with friends, clinking champagne glasses on rooftop bars. There were photos of her in exotic locations that perfectly matched Lucas's business trips. A weekend in Miami in April. Best surprise getaway, a week in London in February, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. And then I saw it. A photo posted 3 weeks ago. It was a close-up of her neck and collarbone, showcasing a delicate pearl necklace. The Sophie Biel Brahe. The caption read, "Sometimes you meet a person and you just know that they are your person." My heart is so full. I scrolled further. Cryptic posts about a love that was complicated, but worth it. A picture of 2 wine glasses with the caption, "Celebrating our future." In the reflection of one of the glasses, I could just make out the blurred silhouette of a man in a suit. Lucas. I felt a wave of nausea so intense, I had to grip the edge of my desk. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was a parallel life. He hadn't just cheated on me. He had built a completely separate world with this woman. A world where he was a romantic hero sweeping her off her feet. He was funding her lifestyle, her apartment, her happiness with the money he claimed to be earning for our family, for our daughter. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the nursery. The crib was assembled, the walls painted a soft shade of lavender. Tiny clothes were folded in the dresser. This room, once a symbol of our shared future, now felt like a stage for a tragic play. Overwhelmed by a sudden wave of nostalgia for a time when I believed in our story, I opened my laptop again, not to look for more evidence, but for comfort. I navigated to my personal cloud storage to a folder I hadn't opened in years, simply labeled Memories. It was filled with old photos from college scans of love letters and short video clips from our early days. And then I saw the file Proposal Audio 05/12/2017 4A. My breath caught. I had completely forgotten about it. On the night he proposed during a picnic under the stars at our favorite spot overlooking the city, I had been so overwhelmed with emotion that I had surreptitiously hit the record button on my phone, wanting to capture his words forever. I had saved the audio file and forgotten all about it. My finger hovered over the play button. Did I really want to hear this? Did I want to hear the voice of the man I thought I was marrying, knowing what I knew now? With a sense of morbid curiosity, I clicked. Lucas's voice, younger, clearer, and filled with an earnestness that tore at my heart, filled the silent room. Amelia Hayes. The recording began his voice, thick with emotion. "From the moment I saw you arguing with Professor Albright about Keynesian economics, I knew I was in trouble. You were brilliant and fierce, and you didn't even know I existed. For the last 2 years, you haven't just been my girlfriend. You've been my home. Everything I do, every ambition I have, it's all just a different path leading back to you. You are my compass, my anchor, my one and only truth in this world. There is no version of my life, no possible future that makes any sense without you in it. I love you more than I know how to say. So I'm asking you, will you make my life complete? Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I listened to my own choked sob on the recording, my whispered yes. It was the most beautiful, heartfelt declaration of love I had ever heard, and it was all a lie. Or was it? He must have meant it then. What had changed? Did it even matter? The man on that recording was dead. In his place stood a hollow stranger who spoke of risk portfolios and loved another woman. But as the audio file finished, the grief was replaced by a surge of electrifying power. I didn't just have credit card statements and phone logs anymore. I had his own words. I had his soul captured in an audio file from a time when he presumably still had one. This recording wasn't a painful memory. It was a weapon, and I knew exactly when and how I was going to use it. The plan began to form in my mind, intricate and precise, like one of my own design blueprints. A simple confrontation was beneath the scale of his betrayal. Exposing him to just me would allow him to wriggle free to spin more tales. No, the demolition had to be public. It had to be witnessed. The pillars of his carefully constructed life-family reputation, success, all had to come crashing down at once. The perfect stage presented itself a week later. His parents, Robert and Carol Sterling, were coming to town. They were lovely people, a classic old-money couple from Connecticut, who adored me and were ecstatic about their first grandchild. They had called to arrange a visit specifically to see the nursery and celebrate with us. Lucas, ever the devoted son, suggested we host a small family dinner at our house the following Saturday. Just us and my parents, he'd said, smiling at me over breakfast. A little celebration for Olivia before she arrives. We can show them everything you've done with the nursery. They'll be so thrilled. It was perfect. The ultimate audience. His adoring parents who saw him as the golden boy who could do no wrong. I spent the week preparing not just for the dinner, but for the performance of my life. I was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. I discussed menu options with Lucas, feigned excitement about his parents' visit, and played the role of the happy, oblivious wife. Inside, I was a coiled spring of ice and fury. Every smile I gave him, every loving touch I accepted, felt like a betrayal of myself, but it was a necessary evil. I was setting the trap, and the bait had to be convincing. The day before the dinner, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, the same number I had traced to Chloe Reed. My heart leaped into my throat. I had expected to have to orchestrate this part of the confrontation myself, but it seemed my husband's arrogance was about to do the work for me. I let it ring 3 times before answering, composing my voice to sound calm, slightly questioning. Hello. Is this Amelia? The voice on the other end was young, confident, and laced with an infuriating note of condescending pity. It is. Who's calling? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. My name is Chloe Reed. She paused as if expecting the name to shatter me. I think we need to talk. About Lucas. Here it was, the moment I had been dreading and anticipating. I walked into the nursery and sat in the rocking chair, my hand resting on my belly. Okay, Chloe. I'm listening. Look, I don't want to do this over the phone, and I know this must be hard for you to hear, especially in your condition, she said, the word dripping with disdain. But you need to know the truth. Lucas and I are in love. He loves me. What he has with you is an obligation, a history. He was going to tell you, but he's been waiting for the right time after the baby is born. He doesn't want to cause you undue stress. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. This girl fed a diet of Lucas's lies, truly believed she was the heroine of this story, and I was the tragic, clueless wife. He had probably told her I was emotionally unstable, that our marriage was one of convenience. He had painted a masterpiece of deception, and she was its primary subject. He told me he's only staying with you out of guilt. She continued, her voice gaining momentum. He said your marriage has been over for years, that you're more like roommates. He doesn't love you, Amelia. He's with me. You deserve to know that your whole life is a sham. I listened, letting her empty her arsenal of rehearsed lines. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. A strange glacial calm settled over me. He told you all that I asked, my voice soft. Yes. He wants to be with me, to build a real life, a life based on passion and real love, not just history. Passion. Real love. The phrases sounded so hollow, so cliché. They were the lines of a man trying to convince a naive young woman and himself that his betrayal was something noble. An idea bold and terrifying sparked in my mind. This was better than I could have planned. Chloe. I said, my voice now laced with a believable manufactured fragility. I don't know what to say. He's been working so hard. He's been so stressed. I thought we were happy. I let a small, pathetic sob escape my lips. It worked. Her tone softened slightly. I'm sorry. I know this is a shock, but it's better you know now. I need to see you. I said the words, tumbling out as if in a panic. I need to talk to you face to face. I can't believe this unless I hear it from you in person. There was a moment of hesitation on her end. I don't know if that's a good idea. Please, I begged, pouring every ounce of fake desperation I could muster into my voice. Tomorrow. Come to my house. Lucas is having his parents over for a small dinner. They'll be here around 7. If you could come around 8, he'll be here. We can all talk this out. Like adults. It was a gamble, a huge one. I was inviting the viper into my nest, but I was counting on her ego. I was counting on her belief that she was the real love, and that her presence would force the issue, forcing Lucas to finally choose her in front of his family. To a 26-year-old who believed she was in a grand romance, it would be an irresistible, cinematic moment. You want me to come to your house while his parents are there? She asked, a note of surprise in her voice. Yes, I whispered. I want to see the way he looks at you. I need to see if it's real. Then I'll know. And I can let him go. Another pause. I could almost hear the calculations in her head, the fantasy playing out. She would arrive, the beautiful, honest truth-teller, exposing the loveless marriage and claiming her man. Okay, she finally said, her voice firm again, full of renewed conviction. Okay, Amelia, I'll be there. 8 o'clock. She hung up. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. The stage was set. The actors had been summoned. All that was left was for the curtain to rise. I stood up and walked out of the nursery, leaving the ghosts of the past and the lies of the present behind me. Tomorrow I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the director. The evening of Saturday, August 1st, descended upon Maple Creek Lane with a breathtaking, fraudulent tranquility. The air in our home was thick with the savory aroma of rosemary roasted chicken and garlic potatoes, a scent I had always associated with comfort and celebration. The dining table, our grand oak centerpiece, was set for 5, with the gleaming Wedgwood china we reserved for Christmas and landmark anniversaries. I had polished the silver myself that afternoon, each methodical stroke a meditation, a preparation for battle. In the center, a bouquet of white tulips stood in a crystal vase, their pristine petals illuminated by the soft, flickering glow of a dozen candles. I had chosen them for their symbolism of forgiveness, a final secret act of irony that was for me alone. I moved through my home, a serene hostess, in a simple navy blue maternity dress that accentuated the proud swell of my belly. My hair was swept into a neat chignon, my makeup minimal. To any observer, I was the very picture of placid maternal contentment. On the inside, however, I was a coiled spring, a general surveying the battlefield just moments before sounding the charge. Every nerve ending was alight, every sense heightened. My composure was a dam, holding back a reservoir of cold, calculated fury. Lucas, my husband, was magnificent in his ignorance. He thrived in this atmosphere, effortlessly slipping into the role of the proud, adoring husband and expectant father. He was dressed in a crisp shirt and tailored trousers, looking every bit the successful man of the house. He complimented the aroma of the food, he rubbed my lower back with a proprietary air of affection, and he regaled his parents with tales of his latest triumphs at the firm. He was a master performer, completely cocooned in the impenetrable arrogance of a man who believes he is the sole author of his own reality. His parents, Robert and Carol Sterling, arrived precisely at 7, their faces beaming with undisguised joy. They were a handsome, distinguished couple from old Connecticut, money radiating an aura of quiet elegance and genuine warmth. Carol, smelling faintly of Chanel No. 5, enveloped me in a gentle, cautious hug, her perfectly manicured hand coming to rest on my stomach. "Amelia, my dear, you are simply glowing," she cooed, her eyes sparkling. "Motherhood suits you so beautifully." "She's a natural," Lucas interjected, draping a heavy arm around my shoulders, his thumb stroking my arm. "Handling everything like an absolute champion while I'm chained to my desk, closing these impossible deals. I don't know what I'd do without her." I smiled up at him, a placid, loving expression I had practiced in the mirror. Inside, I thought, "You have no idea what you're about to do without me. We are just so incredibly proud of you both." Robert added his voice, a deep, reassuring baritone, as he clapped Lucas on the back. He looked around the living room, his gaze sweeping over the custom bookshelves and the art we had collected. "Building such a beautiful home, a strong family. You've done well for yourself, son. Very well." The 4 of us settled in the living room, the heart of our home, the room where Lucas had sworn his love to me countless times. I served his parents wine and poured myself a glass of sparkling cider, the sweet bubbles a mockery of the bitter acid churning in my stomach. The conversation flowed easily, a gentle river of pleasantries. They asked about my health, about the baby's movements, about our plans for the nursery. Lucas dominated the conversation, of course, pivoting back to his work, to the immense pressure he was under, subtly reinforcing the narrative of his sacrifice for our family. "It's the final push on the Matheson merger," he explained, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass. "The due diligence is a killer, but integrity is everything in our business. One slip, one ethical lapse, and the whole house of cards comes down. You have to be beyond reproach." The hypocrisy was so potent, I could almost taste it. I simply nodded, playing the part of the supportive, slightly bored wife, while my mind catalogued his words, filing them away as further evidence. At their request, I gave them the grand tour of the nursery upstairs. Carol teared up at the sight of the assembled crib and the tiny dresses hanging in the closet. "Oh, it's just perfect, Amelia. Absolutely perfect. To think our first grandchild will be sleeping here so soon." Lucas stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, with a look of paternal pride so convincing it was chilling. He spoke of the future of teaching his daughter to throw a baseball, of walking her down the aisle one day. He was building a fantasy of the future, even as I was preparing to incinerate his present. We returned downstairs, the hands on the grandfather clock in the hall, ticking relentlessly, audibly, towards 8 o'clock. Each tick was a drumbeat, counting down the seconds to detonation. At 5 minutes to 8, I excused myself. "I'll just check on the chicken. "And bring in the first course," I announced with a smile. Lucas followed me into the warm, fragrant kitchen. "Everything is perfect, Ames," he whispered, cornering me between the counter and the island. He leaned in and kissed the top of my head, his cologne, the familiar Tom Ford scent, filling my senses. It was the scent of our life together, the scent of a lie. "My parents absolutely adore you. You know that, right? I love you so much." I looked up into his handsome, familiar face, the face I had loved since I was a girl, the face of a complete stranger. A profound, hollow sadness washed over me, a final pang of grief for the man I thought he was. I manufactured a soft smile. "I know, Lucas." We sat down at the beautifully appointed table. The candlelight danced across our faces, casting long, dramatic shadows. Lucas at the head of the table raised his glass. His face was alight with genuine happiness, a man wholly pleased with his life and his own performance in it. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice resonating with sincerity. "To my incredible parents, Robert and Carol. Thank you for your endless love and for being the bedrock of our family. And to my amazing, beautiful wife, Amelia." He turned his beaming face to me. "My rock, the love of my life. You've given me a life better than I ever could have imagined, and now you're giving me the greatest gift of all. Our next chapter with little Olivia is going to be the best one yet. I can't wait to live it with you. To family. To family." Robert and Carol echoed, their faces glowing with pride and affection. As their crystal glasses clinked together in a harmonious chime, a sharp, discordant sound cut through the warmth. The doorbell rang. The sound was jarring an electric shock to the placid atmosphere. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed Lucas's face. He lowered his glass. "Are we expecting someone else?" "No," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of mild surprise. I calmly placed my linen napkin on the table beside my plate. "I'll get it." My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my movements were fluid and unhurried. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished oak floor. Every eye was on me as I walked from the dining room, through the living room, and into the foyer. The house was swamped save for the ticking of the clock. I felt like an actress walking onto a stage, every sense on high alert. I reached the heavy front door, my hand steady as I wrapped it around the cool, solid brass knob. I took one final deep, fortifying breath and pulled the door inward. There, bathed in the soft yellow light of the porch lamp, stood Chloe Reed. She was exactly as I had pictured her from her Instagram profile, though in person her ambition felt more palpable, more desperate. She wore a stylish black dress that was just a little too tight, her makeup a little too heavy for a quiet family dinner. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she held her chin high, but I could see the nervous tremor in her hands. Her eyes, wide and determined, darted past me, fixing on the domestic tableau in the dining room. From the corner of my eye, I saw Lucas. He had risen halfway from his chair, his body frozen in a strange, contorted posture. Every drop of blood had drained from his face, leaving it a waxy, ghostly white. His mouth hung slightly open. His toast, forgotten his expression, one of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked like a man who had just seen his own executioner walk through the door. Robert and Carol simply looked on, their faces etched with polite confusion. "Chloe," Lucas stammered, his voice a strangled whisper that barely carried across the room. What in God's name are you doing here?" Chloe ignored him completely. Her performance was not for him. It was for his parents, and for me. She took a purposeful step across the threshold, bringing the faint floral scent of her perfume, the ghost scent from his shirts, into my home. Her gaze filled with a potent cocktail of pity and resolve landed on me before sweeping towards the Sterlings. "Hello?" she began, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly, but fortified with rehearsed conviction. "I am so terribly sorry to interrupt your dinner. My name is Chloe Reed." She took another deliberate step into the room, forcing Lucas to stumble backward. "I know this is a truly awful way for us to meet Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, but I could not in good conscience allow this deception to continue for another moment." Lucas finally found his voice, a strangled, panicked hiss. "Chloe, this is wildly inappropriate. This is not the time or the place." "It's never the right time for the truth, is it, Lucas?" she retorted, her confidence surging as she saw his panic. She turned her full attention back to his stunned parents, her voice softening into a tone of pained sincerity. "I'm here because Lucas and I are in love, deeply in love. He was going to leave Amelia. He's been agonizing over how to tell you both. He's only been staying with her out of a sense of duty, a sense of guilt because of the baby. But his heart, his future, that's with me." A sharp, audible gasp escaped from Carol Sterling. Her hand flew to her chest, as if to physically keep her heart from breaking. Robert's face, once warm and proud, was hardening into a mask of granite. "Lucas, what is the meaning of this?" Robert demanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She's lying," Lucas sputtered, finally lashing out his eyes wide with frantic desperation. He began to invent, to weave a new lie on the spot. She's a junior analyst from a partner firm. She developed an unhealthy fixation on me. I tried to let her down gently, but she's been harassing me. She's unstable, Amelia, honey. Tell them this is completely insane." Every head in the room swiveled to me. I had remained silent, a calm island in a hurricane of chaos. I let the silence stretch, letting his frantic, pathetic lies hang in the air and rot. Chloe looked smugly triumphant. Lucas looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me to validate his lie to save him. I finally moved. I walked slowly, deliberately to the head of the dining table, to the spot where Lucas had stood just minutes before, toasting our love. I looked at Chloe, my expression not one of anger, but of a kind of clinical pity. "You believe you're his real love?" I asked, my voice slicing through the tension, clear and steady. "He told you our marriage was a loveless obligation, that he didn't love me." "Yes," Chloe said, her chin jutting out defiantly. "He told me everything." "I see," I said, nodding slowly. "The thing about Lucas, you see, is that he tells many stories. He is a wonderful storyteller. He told you a story of a tragic, trapped man finding his soulmate. It's a beautiful story. I'm sure in those moments when he was telling it to you, he was incredibly convincing." I reached into the pocket of my dress and pulled out my phone. My hand did not tremble. My eyes locked with Lucas's. The terror that had been simmering in them all evening now boiled over into pure, abject dread. He knew what was coming. "Lucas," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, which only made it sound more menacing. "You seem to have forgotten some of the other stories you've told. It's so hard to keep them all straight, isn't it? Let me help you remember one of them." With a few deliberate taps on the screen, I connected my phone to the Sonos speaker system that we had installed throughout the house. A small blue light on the speaker in the living room blinked once, signifying the connection. A moment of pristine, perfect silence hung in the air, a collective held breath. And then a voice filled the room. His voice. Younger, clearer, aching with an earnestness that was now grotesque in its sincerity. Amelia Hayes. The recording began his voice thick with raw, unfiltered emotion. From the moment I saw you arguing with Professor Albright about Keynesian economics, I knew I was in trouble. You were brilliant and fierce, and you didn't even know I existed. For the last 2 years, you haven't just been my girlfriend. You've been my home. Everything I do, every ambition I have, it's all just a different path leading back to you. You are my compass, my anchor, my one and only truth in this world. There is no version of my life, no possible future, that makes any sense without you in it. I love you more than I know how to say. So I'm asking you, will you make my life complete? Will you marry me? The audio played out each word, a spectral bullet from the past, tearing through the tissue of his present-day lies. When the recording ended with the sound of my own tearful whispered door, "Yes," the silence that crashed down upon the room was absolute, profound, and devastating. I watched Chloe's face. It was a slow-motion demolition. The defiant confidence shattered, first replaced by confusion, then by a flicker of dawning comprehension, and finally by the vacant, hollow-eyed horror of complete and utter realization. The romantic words he had whispered to her, the promises of a future, she understood now that they were not original. She was not his one great love. She was an echo, an affair built on plagiarized lines and recycled sentiment. Then I looked at my husband. Lucas was a husk. The color had not returned to his face. He was a portrait in shades of gray. His shoulders were slumped, his body seemingly having collapsed in on itself. He was utterly exposed, stripped naked by his own words, haunted and condemned by the ghost of a better man. Carol was weeping openly now, quiet, heartbroken sobs shaking her entire body as she stared at her son with revulsion. Robert was perfectly still, his face like a stone carving his jaw clenched so tight I thought it might crack. Finally, I turned my gaze back to the two of them, the architect of this ruin and his last failed project. "The difference between you and me, Chloe," I said, my voice resonating with a power I never knew I possessed, "is that when I was told a story, I was smart enough to keep the receipts. And the difference between the man on that recording and the man standing in this room," I said, my eyes boring into my husband's, "is that one of them had a soul." I took a deep, cleansing breath, the first truly easy breath I had taken in months. I was no longer a victim in their story. I was the author of its ending. "Now both of you get out of my house." Chloe was the first to break. The silence left by the echo of my husband's recorded voice was too heavy for her flimsy confidence to bear. A choked, guttural sob ripped from her throat, a sound of utter humiliation. Her carefully constructed fantasy had been publicly, brutally dismantled. She didn't look at Lucas. She didn't look at me. Her eyes were wild, unseeing as she spun around and fled her stylish heels, clattering a frantic, desperate rhythm on the oak floors and down the stone steps of the front porch. The sound faded into the night, leaving a void that was somehow more damning than the confrontation itself. Lucas remained a statue carved from ash and disbelief. His entire world had just detonated, and he was standing at its epicenter. His eyes, stripped of their usual confident sparkle, finally found mine. They were begging, pleading for a lifeline, for a hint of the forgiving Amelia he had known and so expertly manipulated for years. "Amelia," he began, his voice a hoarse, broken thing. I can explain everything. It's not what it looks like." Before another lie could form on his lips, Robert Sterling's voice cut through the air like a sheet of ice. "No, The single word was delivered with such quiet, absolute authority that Lucas flinched as if struck. "You cannot explain this. You will not try. You will not say another word to this woman." Robert, who I had only ever known as a jovial, warm-hearted patriarch, now looked like a wrathful god. He rose from his chair, his movements stiff with a rage that seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. He walked not to me, but to his son, stopping a foot away. His face was a mask of cold fury and profound disappointment. "We raised you to be a man of honor," Robert said, his voice low and trembling with suppressed fury. "We taught you that your word was your bond. We celebrated this marriage. We welcomed this wonderful woman into our hearts as our own daughter, and you have desecrated all of it. You have not only destroyed your marriage and brought shame upon your wife as she carries your child, but you have also disgraced the name of Sterling. I have never in my 70 years been more ashamed than I am in this moment looking at you." He did not shout. He did not need to. Each word was a perfectly aimed blow, landing with devastating precision. Lucas visibly shrank under the weight of his father's condemnation, his head bowing in the first genuine display of shame I had seen all night. Carol, her face pale and streaked with mascara, came to my side. She bypassed her son as if he were a piece of furniture, taking my hand in both of her trembling ones. "Amelia, my dear girl," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "There are no words. There are no apologies deep enough to cover this sin. You are our family. Please, whatever happens, know that you are still our family. What he has done, it is unforgivable." She squeezed my hand, a silent promise of allegiance, before turning to her husband. "Robert, let's go. We cannot stay here." Robert gave a curt nod, his gaze still fixed on Lucas with utter contempt. "You will hear from me tomorrow," he stated, a clear threat hanging in the air. Then he turned his back on his son, a gesture of finality more powerful than any argument. He and Carol walked out of the house, closing the door softly behind them, leaving Lucas and me alone in the cathedral of our ruined life. The silence that descended was suffocating. Lucas finally dared to move toward me, his hand outstretched, a pathetic, pleading gesture. "Ames, please, don't listen to them. Listen to me. We can fix this. I swear we can go to counseling. It was a mistake, a stupid, terrible mistake. She meant nothing." I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt nothing. The love, the anger, the pain, it had all been cauterized, leaving behind only a sterile, cold clarity. "A mistake, Lucas," I said, my voice eerily calm. "A mistake is taking the wrong turn on the highway. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. This wasn't a mistake. This was a project. You managed it with the same meticulous detail you apply to your financial portfolios. You compartmentalized. You lied. You created an entirely separate life, funded by the trust I gave you freely. You built a narrative for her, where I was the villain, and a narrative for me, where you were the hero. That isn't a mistake. That is a masterpiece of deception." He flinched, the word project hitting its mark. "No, I love you. I always have. That recording, that was real. That was me. Yes, it was." I agreed, a sad, bitter smile touching my lips. "And that's the tragedy. I think you even believe that right now. But that man is gone. You killed him with 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 lies. You want to fix this as you can't fix something that you have systematically ground into dust. The only thing you've managed to fix tonight is my eyesight. For the first time in a very long time, I see you clearly." I turned my back on him just as his father had done and walked away. I didn't run. I walked up the stairs, each step feeling impossibly heavy, as if I were wading through water. I went into the nursery, the one room that was supposed to be about the future, and closed the door. The lock clicking shut was the signal for my own facade to crumble. My body began to shake uncontrollably. I slid down the wall, my hands clutching my belly, and I wept. It wasn't the loud, theatrical sobbing of a tantrum. It was a deep, silent, body-racking grief for a death. The death of my marriage, the death of the man I loved, the death of the future I had so happily and naively planned. I mourned the loss of our shared jokes, the comfortable silences, the decade of memories now irrevocably tainted. In that moment, the baby kicked a strong, definitive thump against my hand. It was an anchor in the storm, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone. A reminder that my life was not in fact over. It was about to begin, in a way I had never imagined. The next morning, Sarah was at my door with coffee and a lawyer's ferocity. The divorce proceedings were swift and merciless. With Sarah as my advocate, and with the mountain of evidence I had collected, the phone logs, the credit card statements, the hotel receipts, and the sworn affidavits from his own parents. About the events of that night, Lucas had no ground to stand on. He was advised to concede to every one of my demands. The house, a significant portion of his assets, and a generous child support agreement were settled without a fight. Within a week on a day, I made sure to be out of the house. He moved his things. I returned to find empty spaces in the closet and gaps on the bookshelves. But the house felt lighter, cleaner, as if a poison had been purged from its very walls. The fallout for Lucas was catastrophic. His firm, terrified of the reputational damage, didn't fire him, but they did something far more humiliating. They moved him to a windowless office in the compliance department, a gilded cage, where his sterling charm was useless. His career trajectory flatlined. His parents, true to their word, maintained a frosty distance, their support now directed solely towards me and their unborn grandchild. I heard through the grapevine that Chloe had vanished. Her social media was deleted, her number disconnected. She had resigned from her job and moved back to Ohio. Her ambition and her heart broken, a casualty of a war she never truly understood. She was fighting. My own war was with the ghosts in my house. The silence was a constant companion. To combat it, I began a methodical process of reclamation. I hired painters, and with a strange sense of liberation, rolled gallons of warm, sunny yellow paint over the cool, sophisticated grey Lucas, and I had chosen for our bedroom. I sold the dining table, unable to look at it without replaying that horrible night. In its place, I bought a small, round, antique table, perfect for just me and a high chair. I started therapy, learning to untangle the web of gaslighting that had made me doubt my own intuition for so long. It was an exorcism not just of a man, but of the version of myself who had been his willing audience. 2 months later, with Sarah holding one of my hands and a nurse holding the other, I gave birth to a perfect 7-pound baby girl. As they laid her on my chest, her tiny face scrunched and her cry filling the room, I felt a wave of love so fierce and absolute it knocked the breath out of me. I looked at her, this tiny, innocent soul, who was half me and half a man I no longer knew, and I knew I couldn't name her Olivia. That name belonged to the ghost of my old life. I looked at her again, at the unwritten future in her eyes, and I thought about the unearned forgiveness Lucas had expected and the state of being I now craved for myself. "Her name is Grace," I whispered. A year later, the house on Maple Creek Lane was a different place. The silence was gone, replaced by the joyful shrieks of a toddler discovering the world, the sound of cartoons on the television, and the music I played loudly while I cooked. My interior design business, which I had put on the back burner, was now thriving. My portfolio was filled with homes I had helped other families create, each project a testament to my own resilience. One sunny afternoon, I stood in my kitchen, watching Grace chase butterflies in the backyard. She stumbled, fell onto the soft grass, and looked up at me with a pout that quickly melted into a giggle. In that moment, watching my happy, fearless daughter in the yard of our home, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The demolition of my old life hadn't been an ending. It had been a clearing. It had been the painful, necessary raising of a beautiful but unstable structure to make way for something smaller, perhaps, but infinitely more real and built on a foundation of unshakable truth. I was no longer a wife. I was a mother, a business owner, a survivor, a creator. I was whole, not because someone completed me, but because I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. That's where my story ends, but it's also where my new life began. It's a harsh reminder that sometimes the people we trust the most are capable of the deepest betrayals. But it's also a story about finding strength in the absolute worst moments. My husband and his mistress thought they were rewriting my life, but they only gave me the pen to write a much better chapter. One of independence, resilience, and a love for my daughter that is more real than any lie he ever told. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight your way out of the darkness and find your own strength, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and reclaiming your power. Remember, you are the author of your own story. Make it a masterpiece.